I met novelist Cassandra King on a Friday night at the Intercontinental Hotel in the Buckhead area of Atlanta. We began our interview in a somewhat quiet corner just off the lobby, but we had to relocate to the courtyard when a band started playing. Cassandra was patient and carried her microphone. The only thing we need to make sure is that we can get back inside.
Oh, yeah. Well, I have my key with me.
This is just who she is. She's modest and gracious. She grew up on a peanut farm in a rural community outside of Dothan, Alabama. She says she's got a farm story somewhere in her mind, and at some point, she's just going to sit down and write it. I'm Tanner Latham, and this is Authentic South. It's a storytelling podcast that explores Southern culture through food, art, music, the land, the characters, and in this episode, a writer who creates them. Cassandra is the best-selling author of The Sunday Wife and The Same Sweet Girls, and she shares her profession with her husband, famous novelist Pat Conroy. Her latest book, Moonrise, is set in Highlands, North Carolina, and follows Helen Honeycutt, a woman who recently survived a bitter divorce, falls in love and marries a widower, then begins meeting all of her new husband's old friends. I'm really interested in Highlands. I want you to talk to me about Highlands,
okay,
and about how the landscape there, how you were affected by the landscape, how you incorporated the landscape into the book itself. The Blue Ridge Mountains are gorgeous. They're inspiring on their own. Talk about Highlands and that.
Yeah, this book was somewhat different for me to write in that it's the first book that I've known I had the setting first, and place is very important to me. But we have been spending time in Highlands on and off for the past, 7 or 8 years, and had, at one time, when our house was being renovated, had spent several months there. So I totally had fallen in love with it. I, like my main character in my book, not a mountain girl, had traveled some to the mountains, but knew very little about. And also as a writer, it was a part of Southern culture, the mountain culture, that I had not written about. I mostly have stuck with the Gulf Coast, area. So, but I did know that if I was going to do that, I set out to actually set a book there and come up with stories from the area and so forth, that it would be a different kind of book, and it would be a darker book in a lot of ways, because the mountains are just more, there's the foreboding to me, the remoteness. It's not the same as having a Gulf setting, not a beach read, but just even, like with my husband's book, set on, you've got the coast, you've got the salt water, you've got the salt air, and the heat, and all this kind of stuff, which is very different atmosphere, and was going to be a different tone. So I thought this book, even though I knew it was going to be about a group of friends, that one of them, the loss of one of them had sort of devastated the whole group, and then before they had time to recover from her loss, they're presented with a replacement that they lost. So that's a darker, setting. Setup for a story to start with, and the mountain area worked well for that for me. And then, Highlands, that's what I knew. The whole thing, write what you know. It was what I was most familiar with. If we had spent time, say, in Boone or, Flat Rock, other areas in the Blue Ridge, I'm sure I would have said it there, because I'm not comfortable using a setting I'm not familiar with. I have to really, because place is so important and almost becomes another character in the story, and I think it did in this one.
I want you to talk about Helen Honeycutt.
Okay.
And just tell us about how she grapples with, in many ways, the ghost of her husband's wife.
Yes.
And what she does. I mean, it's not necessarily tell us what happens in the book. But
Okay.
talk about that, and talk about what that means.
That's the central conflict in the book. And let me back up just a little bit and say, in creating a story, especially a story about a place or setting up a certain place, then all the elements of the place, factor in. And in this, I had the summer people, and the little groups of summer people that I had observed visiting there. In that it's almost, I hate to say cliques because it has a negative connotation, but you do almost have your little cliques of folks. You have your Jacksonville people, you have your, a Gainesville group, and I'll meet people, and this is a little group that's been coming for generations or whatever, and they're from Tennessee or, this Atlanta, Birmingham, wherever. And so these become very tight-knit groups and very difficult for someone to come into. So what I came up with was a young woman, younger than the group she's trying to get into, because I think some of us, as we age, we kind of have this resentment toward these younger people. And especially an older man marrying a younger woman. So I thought that was a good source of conflict to have that. But I think the main thing with Helen Honeycutt, my main character, who comes into the situation, is that she is out of her element in so many ways. She's a Floridian. She's never been to the mountains. She is, and we hate to think there are social classes in America, but there definitely are, So she was not raised like these people that have big, summer estates and this sort of stuff. She had a very difficult upbringing. She worked for everything she's ever had. And I think she was one of these people, like myself and so many other people, that education got them, out of that. And so her struggle for acceptance is painful in a lot of ways because she feels so inferior. And maybe she didn't to start with. She came into this thinking she was going to be loved and all this. But one of the dumbest things I've ever heard anyone say is that other people can't make us feel inferior. We have to make ourselves. I see what they're saying by that, but I think it's being around other people that we feel inferior to that, makes that happen. So I think that's what happens to her. She gets, and I also felt like this was something that readers would identify with. This not, of a feeling that we're not quite adequate. It's a pretty common, that's a common struggle for most of us, whether they admit it or not, whether the rest of us see it in a person. A person can seem very self-assured and all this kind of stuff, and they struggle just like the rest of us with self-image, self-esteem. So,
do you identify yourself? This is kind of a departure from where we are in some ways. Do you identify yourself as a Southerner? Is that part of your identity?
Yes, very much so. I have been to a lot of writers' conferences and book festivals and so forth where I'll end up on a panel about Southern writing. Is it I feel like it's almost its own genre, a subgenre or something. And I didn't think that much about it at first when I first started doing this, but some writers do not like, Southerners that I know, that write about the South, the basic elements that we see in Southern writing, the sense of place and the racial conflict and all this stuff is all in their work, yet they don't classify themselves as Southern writers. Well, that's fine, nobody's making you do that, but I am a Southerner. That's what I know best, and I'm fascinated by the South. Totally fascinated by the South.
Why? What's fascinating to you about the South?
Well, first of all, the Southern people are just different. We're crazy, but we're the warmest, friendliest people, in the world. And when I'm saying all this, that's not to say that people from other parts of the country are not. As a matter of fact, my girlfriends tease me because I say, I love Yankee women. That's one of the things they tease me. She's a Yankee, I just love her. What I'm saying by that is that, sometimes it's so hard to talk to a Southern woman because we never say what we mean. It takes forever because we're trying to be so sweet and such a Southern belle and stuff. And with Yankee women, you know exactly where you stand. They're going to come right out and say it, and they don't fool with all this stuff. But that's also part of the mystique and the charm. Do you
think that's something that you would want to? Are you that way?
Oh, absolutely.
And is that something? Have you ever tried to change that?
I have. I've tried it so deeply ingrained. I hear my mother saying, "Now, ladies don't do that," or you don't speak your mind up like that, and so forth. Yeah.
Another departure. I've read, actually this was on Pat's blog when your book came out. One of the things that he mentioned was that you guys have writing rooms in opposite ends of the house. Is that
absolutely true? 2 different wings of the house.
I want you to talk about the evolution of your writing relationship with your husband.
Well, that's a very interesting question because there definitely has been one. We married 16 years ago, and at the time it was such a great novelty to be living with another writer, because I had pretty much a certain point in my life I began to keep my writing aspirations to myself, and when I wrote, I journaled and this kind of stuff. I did have a few things, just short stories, nothing personal. Some short stories, poem, a couple essays, things like that. But I didn't see myself writing a novel. And it did. Writers have to, first of all, live in their own little world, I think, in our heads. And usually we're writing stories in our head. We're not always paying attention to other people. And if you're married to someone who really demands all your attention, you're going to have some problems, which I did. And that was one reason I had just put my writing career on the back burner. So being married to another writer was just like, dropping a little fat kid in a candy store. It was great. I had someone who I could talk with, with a writer about writing, about literature, about books, and so forth. So it was wonderful. And I can't let anyone read what I'm working on until I finish. That's just the way I work. But I did, the first few years we were together, I would ask Pat to read. And I've read, a lot of his stuff. He always asks me, and still does, to mark his stuff for grammar, because it pours out of him so fast he doesn't even notice, and he repeats himself a lot. And so I do some editing as though I were doing a freshman paper or something, because I used to teach freshmen. So it was a novelty at first.
Was
just
that
being
hard?
Together. No.
Was that an easy thing
It was,
to
no.
take
It was,
critiques or to take?
absolutely, and Pat's very blunt.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you don't want to know what he thinks about something, don't ask, because he will tell you, and that's what I like. I don't like. I have treasured readers, the people whose opinion I value, that have read, manuscripts. And the ones that are not helpful are just, oh, this is wonderful, don't change a word and all this kind of stuff. I had rather. But he and I have totally different writing styles. So neither one of us, I think, tried to make the other one, change anything. But it was great. But now, he didn't even read my latest book until the advanced reading copy came. He picked it up and said, "Oh, this is your book." I haven't seen this yet. I need to read it. And he did. So I didn't ask or anything like that, because we both are so busy, So, it has been a total evolution.
That's really interesting. I asked you about that. My fiance is a photographer, and we'd both do a lot of different creative things. And I will show her things. Uh-huh. But what I want her to say is how brilliant it is and how wonderful it is. And when she comes back with a critique, it's hard. It's kind of hard for me to take it. What she says is dead on. The critique is perfect. It's exactly what I need to hear. But it's tough in a relationship when you're looking. You may be looking to that other person for encouragement.
I think so.
And I guess that could be a form of encouragement.
Right. And we have. Pat has been wonderfully encouraging to me. I was about to say we've been encouraging to each other, but I haven't needed to encourage him. He's done well without me. But he's been totally encouraging to me. And I ask, what are you working on now? What do you think about for your next book? And this sort of stuff. And that's been very nice.
So the last question is, in this period, the book is out. You're now on tour and doing readings. Is the book? Do you even think about the book much anymore now that you're on? I'm sure. Yeah.
No, the tour is almost ended, and when you go on a book tour and you give time, if you're just doing a signing, that's one thing. But if you have to speak, say at a luncheon and this kind of stuff, oh boy, you get so sick of your book. You think, I cannot do it again, especially if you're doing like one after, going from one city to another, which you kind of do toward the first, But also, I think you probably, as a writer, as a creative person, once you finish something, you have to let go of it. So you're going to go on to the next thing. You can't keep, just dwelling on this book. You certainly can't change anything now. And no, I've been really, really thinking a lot about what my next one's going to be. I've written a couple of articles since, lately, and have another one kind of in the works. And then I'm going to get serious about my next book.
Well, Cassandra, it's been a pleasure talking to you today.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Pick up Cassandra King's novel Moonrise wherever books are sold, and keep up with her at CassandraKingConroy.com. As always, I'd like to thank Chris Hope and Brett Estep, who provide the music for the show. To hear other episodes, click on over to AuthenticSouth.com. You can also hear us at WFAE.org, on iTunes, on Stitcher Radio, and on SoundCloud.
Never be. And I knew that's what I wanted to do with this one.
I'm going to stop here. Can you hear the music? It's like the drum came in and I thought, wow, all of a sudden we're in a concert. Until we go south again, thanks for listening.